Hello, my name is Lowell, he, him, and I'm from the Gauntlet. I'm going to have our other people who are here in this chat introduce themselves in just a second, but I want to tell you what this is. I put on the schedule for the Gauntlet Hangouts a few weeks ago the idea that maybe some people wanted to get together and just talk about games, ask questions of me or of each other, or share some things and just generally chat. We haven't really done that as much on the Gauntlet. We're doing now some Gauntlet Facilitator Camps, and I think that's a great tool, but I hope that we can maybe start doing some things to increase the ability of the group to kind of get together and talk and share info and things like that. Rich has talked about doing some focused sort of group meetings on particular topics or on particular games and things like that. I think that would be kind of cool. In any case, this is all part of the Gauntlet Hangouts. The Gauntlet community is an online gaming community. We have a lot of games on the calendar that's supported by a Patreon, which includes our podcast network, and we have a zine that you get at a certain level. Anyway, all of that is beside the point. Find out more about that at gauntlet-rpg.com. So I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves briefly. We'll when Puckett comes in, we'll have him give the quick spiel. Stephen, we'll start with you.
My name's Stephen. I use the pronouns he, him. I've been gaming with the Gauntlet quite a while, years and years. And I do a lot of convention play, so a lot of one-shot play. And I've had home groups, and they're fine. They just fall apart. And a lot of what I talked about that's in the online doc that Dan created is some of the differences between online play versus face-to-face play.
Awesome. And then that gives us a segue over to Dan. If you could introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Dan. I'm a longtime RPG player. I'm mostly GM, but I don't play a lot. I've only played in one Gauntlet session. I've got a home group, kids group that I used to GM for 4 years. And then I was fired by my 13-year-old. And then I've got a small adult group that I play with fairly regularly. And I'm trying to spin up a work group. Online play is fairly new to me, and I generally play in longer campaigns. So I'm really interested to hear. I'm curious about one shots, and so I'm kind of interested to hear from Stephen about how that works.
Yeah, it's for me. I'm in the same. All my face-to-face is 5-6 year campaigns, and then it's composed to the online play. So, Robert, let me have you give your introduction here.
Yeah, so Robert, he, him pronouns. I've been playing with the Gauntlet now for, I think, a little over a year. Prior to that, I had played just some traditional stuff. So I did a D&D 5th edition and a Pathfinder face-to-face group that both died off early because that's what happens with those. And then I happened to go to Origins and find out all about this wonderful world of indie RPGs and how much it absolutely hates your wallet. Yeah, and then I fell into the Gauntlet, and I've been playing here since. I don't really run games that often, or really at all. So I'm in Lowell's Gauntlet Facilitator Club coming up next month.
Excellent.
So I'm looking forward to changing that.
I'm looking forward to that. I'm excited to do that because I've heard such good things about it from Michael and the other people that have run it. So I'm excited to get in on that. And then David, if you give your introduction.
Yeah, I'm David. I use he, him pronouns as well. I've been doing games or playing games with a Gauntlet for 2 or 3 years in short bursts. And then got into indie stuff maybe a year or two before that. But I've been playing, just D&D since, middle school probably.
Awesome. And I will say, it was just that year before I joined the Gauntlet that I ever started to play PBTA or anything like that. I was doing, more middle of the road games, not super tratty, but it was Rich Rogers that got me in doing PBTA and trying to run it without understanding it, and he was very generous to me with the game that I ran for him. And looking back at it, somebody asked today on the Gauntlet thing about what do you how do you use the videos that you record? If you record online sessions, how do you use them? I have a whole set of videos from those early days. I am never going to watch those. I'm never going to ever watch them. So this is really just a chat. We're going to go about 90 minutes is my plan, because my sister is coming into town at the airport in 90 minutes. So that forms a hard block. Here is the thing that is a bad technique I'm going to do right now. I'm going to throw an open question to the table. When you're running a game, you don't want to do that. You want to aim a question at a particular person, or even if you ask an open question, you want to point it to somebody. That is a thing that I learned a couple of years ago, and when somebody told me it, I was like, "Oh, I should have thought of that. That's much cleverer than I am." So, but I will open it up. Does anybody have a topic they'd like to start with, that they want to begin the conversation on? Okay, I want to point to Dan then, because Dan, you made the document, so it suggests to me that you have some things that you want to talk about.
I did. I made a document, a Google Doc. Maybe we can share that around afterwards. And part of that is because I had this realization a couple of years ago that the good habits that I learned at work cross over pretty well to the good habits of running games. I think it was it Puckett, who's not here, but he was the one who said he had a lot of questions about concerns about pacing. And I thought that was a really, really great question, and just a great kind of big topic about the way it's framed here is any advice on making sure a session concludes at the allotted time and has a satisfying ending. How about advice on making sure the game story flows? So I don't know who put that question in that way, but I really like that question of, we set up an ending time. We imagine our sessions to last that amount of time, and we don't want to necessarily end in the middle of anything, but I've found it helpful to end kind of on a cliffhanger if we know the session's going to conclude, or coming to a nice, tying a nice bow on it if we know it's just a one shot. So I'd be curious to hear more about what does that look like in your games?
Well, I'll go ahead and start, and then I want to throw it open to everybody else. One of the things is, I think that I am always aware of what time it is. I always know. I have my clock up in the top corner. When I'm running at the table, I have my phone by me to look at. I'm acutely aware of the time for breaks and things like that. And so that's one thing. The other thing is that, and this is something I say at conventions to people, is for one shot, especially at cons, I'll say, when we get to that last 30 minutes, we want to get to a conclusion. So you're going to see me start to hard frame scenes. I may push people in particular directions. I might say that we need to get these characters together in a scene. I may push the pace forward. And I establish that expectation that might happen, such that the players are also watching the time. And I will say, even though I say that, I don't usually have to do that, because the players are also on board with, okay, we want to be heading towards that at the end. So I'm really explicit about that. I think setting expectations helps out a lot with that, and being aware of the time. Other people's thoughts about that?
Can I ask just a quick follow-up?
Sure. Yeah.
I want to feel like this is a good opportunity to maybe define some terms. So
Sure.
you use the phrase hard framing, and I think I know what that means, but I'd be curious to kind of hear how that works in a game, what that means and how that works in a game.
Yeah, so a lot of the PBTA and the indie games that we're all playing, are pretty loose about the GM saying, okay, now you're here, or this thing happens. It's responsive moves, or it's letting the players, have complete autonomy. For me, hard framing means I go, okay, I think we need to get Stephen and Robert together, on stage for this next scene so we can start to bring this forward. And let's hard frame us into, you very explicitly set, this is the scene we need to go into, and it's kind of, it's the pushing and saying this is it. Hard framing is what classic GMs do all the time. So we kind of bring those tools back. I think that's probably the best way to put it.
That's great.
So
other people.
I'd like to comment on a couple of things. Number one, I want to bookmark a couple of topics that Dan brought up so we can touch on later. Number one, you said your work relates to tabletop game GMing kind of stuff, and I'm curious what kind of work that is. And the second thing is you mentioned running for kids, which is a great topic, and I'd like to discuss that a little bit. But to answer the actual question, so I prefer to play games rather than run games. I run about 3 to 6 games a year or so. And usually they're one-shots for an event or something like that. And the way I develop pacing comes back from my history of running old D&D or organizational modules, RPGA modules, where they're kind of a program, and they have, 3 combats and 1 role-playing encounter per game, and you know what to expect. So whenever I tend to prep a game, I tend to think about what are interesting things that could happen, and I sit down and say, okay, here's 3 or 4 encounters that we could have during the game, and I'll watch the time. So during that first encounter, I'll say, okay, that took an hour, so I need to drop one of these, and I'll have an optional one. And if like the second one, takes double the time that the first one did, then I have a great idea of, okay, then I need to jump to the end, and we'll narrate how we got there, and then we'll just go into the finale. It works a little bit better with one shots in that you have a beginning, middle, and end, and then an epilogue that you can plan out during 3 or 4 hours. With longer term games, I would find that a little bit more difficult to have a satisfying cliffhanger or a satisfying event before ending the session. I'm not sure how to exactly get there.
Yeah, one of the things I think is, as a GM, you do have to be willing to go, okay, I think we've hit the high point, and maybe end early sometimes. I've seen GMs who need to fill the time, and they want to fill that time, and we get to the point and I'm like, oh, that's the perfect ender. And then they keep going, and I'm like, stop, just stop, please. We that would have been perfect capper. And I think you really do, you have to read the energy of the moment there. Leave them wanting more, I guess. David, thoughts, questions?
Yeah, I was the one who put that part of the question in there. So yeah, that's something I totally struggle with a lot, especially with face-to-face groups.
Mm-hmm.
Like I always try to shoot for 3 hours, but kind of the people I play with are usually like, David, you mean 4, right? I'm like, no, but maybe. So yeah, I think I might be guilty of that. Just what you just described, Lowell, where it's like, oh, this would be the perfect time to stop. But it's just like, but maybe we should do one more scene, right? I always fall into that trap, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting for my face-to-face group. I play with several of them, multiple groups, and they're used to my style. They're used to that. We're going to have 3 hours at the table. If we're playing 13th Age, there's a chance we're going to go to 4 hours because it's 13th Age. But they also play, the group plays in a Pathfinder game that I know goes to like 1, 2 in the morning on a long night, and I'm like, I am too old for that shit. There is no way I'm doing a 5-6 hour session anymore, especially not with Pathfinder. But no offense to Pathfinder people out there. But yeah, they are used to me going, okay, I think we're done, and okay, I've they know how I operate. They know that have the expectations on that, and they know if I do go to the next scene now, because I do cut short often, then they know that it's going to matter, that I'm not dragging them along for yet another ride, that I have a reason for pushing onwards. I hate it when I get a session where I hit that 3 hour and I'm like, we haven't hit that mark. We haven't hit a point where we can do that. And that happens every once in a while. But it is much more for me face to face. I will more often have that problem there than I will in an online session. Robert, as a player, what do you think?
I mean, I think as a player, I do really prefer just being upfront with the players. I mean, when you just, come out and say, when you can feel that ahead of time and say, look, we're getting up to that point. We are going to start hard framing, so think through how you want that to end. Because I have, I play in convention, like indie games on demand fairly often. And I've been in more than one game where we get up to that end point and it's just like, okay, you have 5 minutes, like give your quick epilogue, and it's just not satisfying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you got to give that room.
Yeah,
to people.
And then I would also say on the Gauntlet, in a lot of the games I'm in, the players kind of feel that too, and you can feel that you're getting up to the end. And going back to your point about maybe ending early, I think sometimes people can feel like, oh, we're getting up to that conclusion, and then people just start getting like more and more bonkers. And then if you threw another scene in there, it's like, well, I don't know how we're going to top that.
Yes.
Like I think the end of our legacy game was kind of like that.
We did get it. The stakes got to 11, and then they went up another degree. And then when epilogues were like, were crazy. They were very, very off the scale at that point.
Yeah, and we probably had room for another scene in there, but it's like, where do you go from that?
Yeah. The god ship tearing the world apart. So yeah, where do you go from there?
Stephen had mentioned kind of prep and the kinds of prep that you do, and what I have found helpful is one of the scenes or one of the kind of ideas that I've had, whatever that might look like, I kind of hold that back until the end. And so even if we haven't gotten to a nice, and again, I'm used to kind of longer drawn out campaigns, even if we haven't gotten to a nice, interesting cliffhanger, I think I would frame it as I throw in a hard move almost at the very end. Mm-hmm. That's sort of like our ending point to kind of tee us up for next time. Like, oh, and then this person shows up, and we'll end there and then do our end of session stuff. So in a sense, it kind of artificially creates that cliffhanger, but it allows us to kind of keep the story going and end at what seems to be a satisfying point.
Yeah. One of the things I've done the last few years is sometimes when people give me a hard move, I will say, I'm going to take that hard move you've just given me. I'm going to put that over the shelf. It's going to come back. I'm going to tell you right now, it's going to come back, but this is not the moment, because sometimes you don't want to put a hard move in because it's going to break up the pacing and flow of a thing, or you have a good idea for how you can pull that into the conclusion scene. And I think if that sometimes GMs feel like they have to do the hard move immediately, or it has to be explicitly a response to what's happening there. I think it can be more meta and a little more generalized. Stephen, you were going to say?
Yeah, one of the things that I thought of is that the Gauntlet taught me, whenever I was running a home game for a while, we ran for a year and a half or so. We were playing Dungeon World, and eventually scheduling caused that to end, and it was very unsatisfying. And what I learned from the Gauntlet is what helps is having a short-paced sequence of games. So having the 1 month long, the 4 sessions of games fits really well, and you can get a satisfying arc from that. And I think that was one of the mistakes that I'd made in my home game was, I tried to run for a long period of time, and, we just kind of meandered. If you have that deadline, okay, we have these, this is the middle session, so something, kind of needs to happen. This is getting close to the end. It needs to be a big thing. we're getting close to we're in the final session. Everybody needs to have their spotlight moments to see where they're going, and then we can play something else for the next month and then come back to it.
Yeah, Robert and I played Legacy, and that was a game that I'm so used to now focusing on that 4-session or 5-session arc and being kind of having a sense of what that pacing is. Legacy is a game that's not enough. You are not going to get through all of the tools. You're not going to get through everybody's scenes. You're not going to get a chance to do all the stuff you need to do in 5 sessions. And that was startling to me, because I'd gotten so used to being able to go, okay, we can do this in 4. We can do this in 5. So other questions. Well, actually, let's come back to the question that Stephen put out there. So Dan, you're mentioning about the sort of the parallel between your work and some of the stuff you do for gaming prep and so on. Do you want to talk about that a little?
I mean, I guess all I was just saying is think like really good, if we all work in knowledge type work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Information type work, taking good notes, having an agenda of things to talk about, being able to ask good questions, like all of these things I find I've got parallels to the kind of knowledge work that I do as well. And I think that's due in large part because it's knowledge work. We're trying to draw the best out of ourselves and our coworkers, and we do that at the game table as well, where we're presumably our intent is at the game table to build this interesting story, this interesting world, tell stories about interesting characters. The nuts and bolts of what we do at work might be different, but the mechanics of, hey, it'd be good if we went into this meeting with an agenda, or as Lowell, as you were saying, like, you know what? It's an hour-long meeting, but we've gotten everything done in 45 minutes. Let's not drag this out. Let's just say the meeting is done. So it's those kinds of habits that I was.
Oh yeah. I think you can't underestimate how much GMing is really meeting management. Mm-hmm. is sort of that process of getting everybody's input, of making sure everybody's had their say, of keeping things going, of managing times and pushing slowly on, learning the pattern of the people who are in the meeting. I mean, one of the things is having run as much as I do and having had a chance to play with a number of people over and over again. Like I played with Robert quite a bit. I played with Stephen quite a bit. I played with Patrick Knowles quite a bit. For example, I know that if there's a chance for somebody to shoot off and do the craziest thing, I know Patrick Knowles is going to go for that. And I can tell you 100% that is what's going to happen. And I have that in the back of my mind. And that's about knowing your team in some ways.
Yeah, totally. What I'm curious, in situations where you don't know the folks as well. I mean, I don't anticipate myself getting into convention play, but I do want to play more with the Gauntlet, maybe eventually run games on the Gauntlet. Like, I imagine you get a mix of player types in mm-hmm. there. Someone you've played with for a while, they're going to do something intense or off the beaten path. You know how to work with them on that. What do you do when you don't know the person as well? How does that play out?
I think, well, when I go into a con game, we've got some of the basic stuff that we're going to have there. We're going to talk about safety tools. We're going to talk up and do the CATs, the concept, aim, tone, subject matter. We're going to walk through those steps so everybody's on the same page. But the other thing I do is I try to get there a little early. And as people are sitting there, before we kind of get formally going, I will ask questions to gauge where they're at. What's your experience with this game? What have you played? Why'd you sign up for this? What kind of thing you've been thinking about? And asking those questions, and then trying to have that in mind. If I've got a completely new table of people, I try to be really explicit about my expectations. I'm going to set when we're going to start, I'm going to start you all in different places. We'll get interactions with your NPCs, and then I'm probably after that I'm going to move everybody to like doing cross scenes. So just that's why I'm setting it up this way. you know, we're going to take a break at X point. I try to be really explicit about expectations and explicit about what I'm doing as a move as a GM. I'll say, okay, I think I'm going to cut there because I think we need to come over here to this to get this response from this player. I really try to verbalize why I'm making those choices with new players. If I've got a mix of people where I know some people and I don't know others, I will very carefully try to pair up an old and a new player in a scene. I will very explicitly do that. And I always try to have a veteran player go first because they know kind of what the expectations are, maybe a little bit better, and they can model play then for the players that come after that. They'll know, okay, this game is a conversation. These are the kinds of things I need to be asking. These are the kinds of neat things I can say. This is the room that I have as a player. That would be my take on it. I'd be curious what other people think about that from their GMing. Or even playing at cons.
So about half of the time I GM, it's for strangers. I organize a group of GMs to run things on free, especially indie games on Free RPG Day, which happens I think in June sometime.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever I run, usually that's just strangers who didn't even know they were going to get in a game that day, and they just sit down at the table. One of the things I do is I'm very explicit about using the X card, using safety tools. That puts everyone a little bit at ease. And one of the examples I give, usually I have this spiel that I give about the X card, and I give examples of things that you can X. Like, I've had people X things because they don't like spiders. I've had, I've played games with rape victims. I've played games with ex-military who had PTSD. And that's a big gambit of people who, they might be offended. Oh yeah, who would willy-nilly be worried about spiders? And they might dismiss the X card. Or you talk about something like, a soldier with PTSD, they're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of reason for that. And, sure, the X card's important at that point. Before the X card, I used to frame things in terms of movie ratings. Like, are we going to play a PG game or an R game or a G game? What's this going to be like? And then, you get a feel for people after a little while, what they're looking for in the game. That's what I tend to look for. This person wants to beat something up, so I need to make sure that they have something that they can beat up during the game. And that person, they want to form a romantic relationship with someone else in the party. And then this other person, they want to, shine. The only problem that I tend to have really is whenever there's someone who wants to beat up everyone else in the party, and there's the whole PvP thing, and it's like I try to kind of steer that subtly. But yeah.
Would you ever sort of draw that boundary at the beginning? Just say we're trying to play a cooperative game here.
Yeah, so that's what I often do during the concept of what I'm running. Hey, I'm going to run Dungeon World for everyone. We're all part of a group. We're going to go try and steal the MacGuffin or whatever the thing is, and we're going to try to work together to do so. And where something strange happens, where it's like, oh, I'm going to go after this guy, you're like, well, that might be an issue. Let's talk that through. Or I'll turn to whoever's being attacked and say, are you okay with this? Are you on board? Is this something you want to see? Just to make sure there's explicit consent. Yeah.
My thing I often say is our default assumption is that you all know each other and you at least relatively like each other. Because sometimes with the relationship buildings that happen in PBTA games, there's a lot of antagonistic questions and things. So I want to make it really clear that like I'll give you actually an example here that's really concrete. I love Tales from the Loop. I think Tales from the Loop premise is really good. It's really strong. But it has a set of relationship questions that it is very easy for the players to read those. And if you haven't framed it that you're a gang, you have a clubhouse, you are friends, it'd be very easy for them to walk through those relationship questions and create people who do not like each other. you have to establish that bound. And I didn't realize that the first couple of times I ran it, and I was like, oh, I need to be really explicit about this, because the way the game has set that up is a little more antagonistic, to create tension in the assumption that you're friends. Other thoughts, questions?
Yeah, I was gonna say, just to tack on to the end of that, like one sort of trick that I use when I run conventions and stuff, which I usually just do one a year.
Mm-hmm.
It's a local one that's mostly a comic convention, and like the gaming is just like me in a sea of like Pathfinder and D&D stuff. So they're usually like, PTB, what does this mean? What's going on here? So a trick that I've used to kind of speed things along and kind of get people to sort of get buy-in faster is just to, most of the Powered by Apocalypse games are based on some kind of other property with the serial numbers filed off.
Mm-hmm.
I just like put those serial numbers back on. Like I do masks like, you're the Teen Titans, like Robin, this is you now. Or I did like X-Men and stuff, and just kind of almost like a frame, not like quite like a pre-generated character, but this familiar situation kind of orients people faster, I guess, for people that are just like especially learning the new games.
That's exactly right. I've seen that before. So I run, I like picking up properties just like you did. So like I'll grab the D&D cartoon and run that in Dungeon World, or Firefly's a great one. If you pick a system that's good for Firefly, you can run Firefly, and fans of Firefly have seen 20 hours or 10 hours, 15 hours of character development, and they know exactly what those characters are going to do. So
the one thing I will say with that, and I think that is good, I think giving touchstones and properties is really important. Like I've with Hearts of Wulin, I've had to like, okay, this is Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, if you know that, and things like that. But one of the things that Sherry said to me, and this is a while back, was that people have very different senses of what genre means, of what's like swashbuckling means, or even what Tolkien fantasy. We may have a sense of what that is, in the general. I think one of the best ways to explain that is, what are we actually going to be doing? What are we going to be doing at the table? It's one of the pitfalls when I go through these histories of RPGs, is I'll pick up an RPG and it's got a cool setting and it's got a great idea, it's got a great concept, but nowhere does it tell me what we're doing as players. It doesn't say, these are the kinds of tasks that the game assumes play is going to surround, or here are ideas. Not even like, they don't even have to necessarily say these are absolutely what we're going to do, but just give me a sense of what we should be doing, what should an adventure look like. And I think, again, that some of that's in Cats, giving that sense of what that play is.
Lowell, is there a good game or is there a game that you can think of that does that well?
That does that well.
Because I have to admit, I came to PBTA maybe 2 years ago, if that, and it was mostly reading the books until we got to play our Dungeon World campaign. And that was sort of a coming of age for me. That was like, I was literally learning how to GM while I was GMing that game. And fortunately, I was playing with very close friends, so they were very patient with me. But I never got that picture from the book. I can see it now when I read the book.
Yeah.
I know there's supplemental materials that are really good that kind of help me rock it, but I didn't really get it until I played for a long time. Maybe listened to some actual plays. But I'm wondering, are there any good RPGs out there that do a good job of saying, here's exactly what you're going to see at the table?
I would say I have some issues with some of the free league games, like in terms of system mechanics, like Coriolis and things like that. But I think if they do one thing well, it is telling you what the play is going to look like. These are the kinds of things we're going to be doing in Mutant Year Zero. These are the kinds of things we're doing in Tales from the Loop. They're really explicit about that. And I think that's really helpful. They lay out what their expectation is for play in a different way than say, like, I love Urban Shadows, but I'm not sure Urban Shadows at the start makes it clear what that game is going to look like at the table. I think it goes, here's a bunch of playbooks. We're going to do these things. Things are going to happen. Everything's going to emerge from that. But I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what the shape of it is. First time I ran it, I was super lost as a GM about where I needed to frame people in, where things needed to go.
One of the things I look for in a game whenever I'm looking to say what's going to happen at the table as a player is XP triggers. So, if I look on the playbook and it says you get XP for lying to someone, then it's like, I'm going to be lying to somebody, and this is what it means, and this is kind of what my character does. I think a lot of the PBTA games should or do point you in that direction by saying, this is what you get a cookie for.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and some of the more recent games, this is something that Rich and Rach have talked about on +1 Forward. Some of them have come out with player agendas that are player principles that are parallel to the GM ones that say, this is what in general you want to do, but also for this particular character, these are the kinds of things. If you play this character, if you want to do X, Y, and Z, and if you do take this character, these are the kinds of things you need to be leaning into.
Yeah, Rach did an interview with is it Brendan Conway, who's designing Root game, and they were it was fascinating, and I wish they could have talked twice as long about this, but they were talking about characters as protagonists and sort of embodying a type of protagonist in the character. And I'm hopeful that they brought this to Root, because this is the context in which he was talking about it. But it reminded me of actually a Free League gaming, Coriolis. In the GM section, they've got a list of the classes. And it says, if the player is this class, these are the things you should expect them to focus on and do. And it was just a little sidebar, but Lowell, to your point, I mean, it was such a good summary for me as the GM to kind of look at those and go, okay, I know, what my scout is incented to do. So I'll play to those as well. And I feel like even games that make those even more explicit, I think help the GM a lot.
I'd say that's one of the biggest failings of Blades in the Dark. And I love Blades in the Dark. Like, I love it. And I've run a lot of it, and I've run a lot of the Forged in Dark games. I don't think it does a good job of saying to the GM, if people have taken this playbook, these are the things you need to be thinking about in terms of the mission. These are the things you need to be doing for that. And it's hard, because I do think that Blades needs some of that perspective. A game that does it really well is the Sprawl. They have their missions. They have a scenario collection of missions, and it says at the start of each mission, this is a great mission for these playbooks. It is not a great mission for these playbooks. And I think that's a cool thing I would like to see more of, kind of saying, upfront what kind of tasks and sets of interest are in a particular scenario or setup. Puckett, it's good to have you.
I am so glad to have finally made it.
Okay.
That was an ordeal.
I have had the computer kill me for hours on. I've had to cancel sessions because of the computer. So, David, you were saying.
I was going to add masks is another good one with that. It's not quite player facing, but in the GM section they kind of give like a page or so on like, if each different playbook, this is kind of how you run that. And I think they even have like specific like GM moves for each playbook. That's another Brandon Conway, I think, too, right?
Yeah.
He's good
He
at
also
that.
has some, doesn't he have a section in there about pairings of particular playbooks? Like if you put, the bull and the legacy together or things like that. I think there's some stuff about that, which I think that's fascinating to give the GM ideas for hooks like that.
So
Robert,
I'll bring up
yes, please, Stephen,
I'll bring
go.
up a Tridendo game. Numenera does something kind of right and wrong. So in the 300-page
It's
book,
Numenera. That's what's wrong.
right.
Go on.
In the 300-page book, there are descriptions of, this game is about exploration, and you should be, you get XP from exploring and discovering new things. And then there's a big chapter on fighting, or there's a whole bunch of, all that kind of stuff. So, take that with a grain of salt. It also, all the characters are built with a sentence. I'm a subject noun, or I'm an adjective noun that verbs. And whenever I've run one shots with Numenera, I don't pass out the character sheets because then people get distracted looking at all the numbers and everything. I pass out the sentences and say, pick a sentence, because this tells you what you do. I'm a inquisitive jack that wears technology. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm a cyborg kind of dude. Okay, let's go look at that. So
it's kind of tangential, and then I'm going to come and ask Robert a question here. But Rich told me that he had a conversation with Baker, and he said that when he goes to run like Apocalypse Worlds at like cons and one shots, he gives them the character sheet. They choose their playbook, and then he gets going. And there's no, okay, we're going to do the whole character creation phase and building relationship phase. Like he starts it out and throws them into the situation and starts asking him questions, and then says, okay, I think you have maybe, do you have a move that relates to that? And then forces them back to their character sheet, which is running without a net, like well past what I am comfortable with. I'm not sure I could do that, but I think it's super cool that that's possible. Robert, questions, things you wanted to talk about, topics?
Actually, I mean, kind of going to like sort of what we've been talking about with the prep, having just gotten into any non-traditional games like in the last year, I think kind of the most, I guess, impressive or magical thing that I watch people do in like every first session that we play in is that whole like, okay, everybody made their characters. We talked about who our characters are, our relationships, etc. And then we have like that. So it's basically 4 or 5 people all come in with an ingredient, and then we have like a 10-minute break, and whoever's running it has that 10 minutes to go, okay, these are my ingredients. How do I make something out of this? And it's really fascinating to watch. And I was just wondering if anybody had any tips for how to, take everything that just happened in like 30 to 45 minutes of character creation. You take that 5-10 minute break, and like, how do you come up with whatever it is you come up with out of that?
There's a speech giver's trick where they do the Q&A, where when you go to answer a question, you actually repeat the question back to give yourself more time to think. And part of the reason that I do those individual scenes after we do character creation is I'll find, the people who have the good hooks, the explicit hooks, I'll throw them in, we'll play those scenes out. And that gives me time to think about, okay, how can I cut that up to the next player? You let the players give you the room to think about that. Start with the one that you maybe know best or know might push onto other people's things first. Be really strategic in your choice of who goes when. Setting the order at the start. That I think that's important, and things will emerge. And sometimes a player will go, okay, well, I want to go and have a scene with this person, and then we move that way. Then they start pulling those threads together. I think that's a start is letting them build the emergent part of it. Other people's thoughts on that, because I imagine that there's ton of different ways to go about that.
So I've started a intermittent campaign of Spire, which if you haven't played is really worth.
We interviewed Jamila Najati last night, and she was going on about this. I haven't bought Spire.
It's great.
I'm gonna have to put a bunch of money and get all the stuff for it because it looks really sweet. So
It's great.
okay.
But and I can go off on a tangent here about settings in games because it's clear that this is a game that's aimed at people like us who have expertise with role-playing games. If this were the first game I would ever look at, I would be completely lost. But I was I wanted to do a 2-session Spire thing with some friends from work, and we were playing online though because we're distributed. I had just played in a Hearts of Wulin game run by Shane on the Gauntlet, so I kind of had that background of like, okay, I saw how Shane did. He did a brilliant job, so I saw how he did this.
It's a very good GM. Yeah,
he did. We made our character, and I was playing with other Gauntleteers, so I was like the only newbie in the group. Anyway, we made in the Spire game, we made our characters, and then I said, okay, I'm going to take a 15-minute break, and then I panicked because I was like flipping through the setting of this of Spire, and if you're familiar with it, you will know it is incredibly dense. I mean, there's just a lot to this setting, so much so that it was like I didn't know where to start. We're getting to the end of the 15 minutes, and then I was like, you know what? I'm just going to ask the players. And so I spent the last like 3 minutes, after spending 12 minutes freaking out, I spent the last 3 minutes writing down like 3 or 4 questions. We come back from the break, and I turn to one of the players, and I'm like, so you study this weird thing called the vault. What are you doing right now in terms of studying the vault? And like, that was what got us going. What I've been coaching my son to do, he runs a D&D campaign, but he's trying to do it in a more narrative style, is our prep should be asking questions. We've already talked about this. And like Lowell, I think, was sort of intimating, like, I feel like I get the best material out of them rather than out of myself. So what I'm going to experiment with next time I run one of these sessions is spending that prep time just saying, okay, I've heard your characters, I've heard the relationships between them. What if I'm genuinely a fan of the characters, if I'm genuinely curious about them, what questions do I have for them? And use the prep time to just write those leading questions.
What if you aren't a fan of their characters, though?
Oh, that's a side question. Let me come back to that in a second. I want to say this, and I'm going to answer that. GMing, as much as I say, is meeting management, it's interviewing. And it's about being a good interviewer, asking those leading questions. And if I had one I would recommend anyone listen to Paul F. Tompkins' Spontaneous Nation podcast. It's a podcast where he interviews a celebrity, and then they do an improv segment at the end. And if you like improv, you can listen to that. His interviewing is on point. It is really well managed. It is smart. He asks the kind of questions you want to ask. He draws things out from his interview subjects. I think he's a really good model for what an interviewer needs to be doing at the table. Like, I think Terry Gross is great on Fresh Air, but she also inserts a lot of herself into the questions, and sometimes the questions will go on way too long. I think you have to be tighter about that, especially as a GM. And Puckett, you asked, what if we're not fans of the characters? I think you have to hook on to something that you find interesting about that character. And even if you don't like him, even if you're like, ugh, they're doing this character again, or they're this. Find something that you're curious about what the scene is going to look like when that character runs into another kind of situation. I'm trying to think. The few times I've been like not a fan of the character, it's been less about the character itself and more about how the player has decided to play it. Like they've decided to play very defensively, which is not a great play. Like, let's say masks. Masks ask your characters to be out there and be vulnerable. Ask your character to put them out. And it can be frustrating when a player goes defensive and shuts down possibilities, or a character that doesn't make decisions, and that's because the player can't make decisions. So I in that case, I try to separate the player from the character in my head, and focus on the things I like about the character that have been established that I do think are cool, and kind of try to press on those buttons to get around those issues.
Or at least, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, the things that you find interesting about the character. You may not like it. You may not like the character, but you may find something interesting about the character, like a little you can leverage it or push it in a certain way.
Often about things that they've kind of thrown off about NPCs or their interrelation things. This is where the interviewing comes in, where you go, okay, they just said this. Why did they mention this about their father? It was just a thrown off comment. Let's dig into that. Let's have them explain why they said that and what that means. You don't want to ask the obvious questions, or you want to start with some obvious questions and then try to take that 90-degree turn to get people to break out of maybe their immediate thinking, because of course when we're playing, we're thinking, okay, here's all my canon, here's all my head canon for my character, here's all my backstory. You're thinking along these lines, and then the GM asks you something that is left field, and that makes you have to stop and reassess and refocus on the game. But I've very rarely had games where I didn't like a character. But I'm not as picky as, say, Rich Rogers. So,
Interesting. So I'm going to say something a little bit vain. I found in playing in the Gauntlet, I'm a little bit spoiled because most of the people I played with in the Gauntlet are very good and very good players, and they have very interesting characters. Whenever I run games or play games at a local store or a convention or something like that, that's whenever I start to run into issues with, I need to pull more out of this person, or I need to interact with them in a different way to get the game going, something like that.
Yeah, I will say if I've had like issues with players in the Gauntlet, it has been people who themselves are a little indecisive and they need more time to make their decisions, and we don't have that luxury of time at the online game, because silence in an online game is painful. You need to let that happen, but sometimes it gets to be too much. And I've also hit times where a player was clearly overwhelmed by the mechanics, and that's a challenge, because once you get rolling, if suddenly you realize a player is not getting some things, you need to stop and slow down, and that'll throw me right off my stride. That'll break my momentum. I'll admit that.
Sorry.
Yeah, please.
One thing that I do, like you folks are saying, like the Gauntlet totally has me spoiled too. But if I run into like a convention or face to face, like with my friends, especially when we're playing one shots, really love to mess with me. And even though I'll do like cats and everything, they come up with like the dumbest idea for a character ever, just to I don't know, get a rise out of me. But my kind of developed method to deal with that is just to ask as many serious questions. Like, okay, you're gonna make a super duck in masks. All right. Well, who made the super duck? Like, just ask more and more like serious questions until it forces them to think about this ridiculous character in serious terms, and then usually something will hook out of that. And I'm like, all right, I am a fan of you now. Sure, you can be the super goose, I guess.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Always taking people seriously, taking them at their word. They said this, okay, that's what we're doing. That's what you're saying. We're gonna roll with that. Not second guessing, but yeah, and let them dig their own hole, as it were, there.
No, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because in my kid's first game at a free RPG day thing, she GM'd Ryutama, and somebody came in and she was talking about, well, basically what I now call cats. And this individual decided that they wanted to have a talking moose named Greg as part of the story. And it threw, I think, everybody at the table for a loop. So it's interesting to me to hear you talking about ask more serious questions and force them to really get grounded in it, so that this talking moose isn't just a joke, that the talking moose has a reason for being there. It has its own motivations. It has its own purpose, its own drives. So that actually kind of answers one of the questions that I had jotted down in that document that Dan put together. So thank you.
Yeah, and I will say this too. Sometimes you can tell when people are bad faith players and are going to do, the moose at the table to be hilarious. And that's X card territory. If you're like, I don't want this to disrupt other players' thing, you can say, I'm going to X card that. I think that's off tone for what we're doing here. So we're going to X card that. And it's a chance to model the X card for tone and so on. I think I'd use that sparingly, but it is a way, if you get in a situation where you're looking down the barrel of that, to go, I have a tool. I am, as a GM, we all have a tool. If I'm a player, Rich actually, I keep citing him because I played with him a lot. Rich will often, when somebody comes up with something that he feels is gonzo or off tone when he's playing as a fellow player, he will X card people's stuff. He's like, let's not do that. That's not what we've already established as a baseline, and so on. And I respect that he's willing to do that.
Just set your boundaries.
Yeah.
I can say, so I don't know exactly how they did it, but I was at a convention at some point and I watched a GM pull off something that was masterful. He knew 3 of the people at the table, and then there were 3 strangers, and we were playing Don't Rest Your Head.
Ooh.
And one of the players, you could tell after we were into the game a little while, an hour or so, one of the players was super interested in being a jerk, to phrase it nicely.
Mm-hmm.
And he started PvPing people and going against a group and not playing cooperatively. And I watched the GM struggle with it just a little bit, and then he took the guy outside, and they had like the little sidebar and everything, and came back in, and he was like, okay, great. Here's what happens. He betrays your group, and the player then played out, his little action of, I'm going to attack everyone, and the group put him down, and he died, and he was super happy. He got exactly what he wanted, and I was like, huh, it was like a masterclass. I was like, I don't know how he pulled that off, but he gave everyone at the table exactly what they wanted, and they walked away happy.
That's hard. That's somebody who knows the genre and is willing to take that risk.
And I think knows the people.
Okay.
So he knew this guy, so I think he knew better than us what he wanted out of the game.
Oh, okay.
Did you ever find out what transpired in that outside conversation?
Oh, I think the outside conversation, I do not know exactly, but my assumption was that it was took him outside and said, what are you looking for? Do you want to fight them? Here are your options.
Okay.
You know, you have the option of joining the group and cooperating with them, or you can join the bad guys and you can fight them.
So something like a come to Jesus moment, as we used to call it.
That's what I
Yeah,
assume.
Like
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
right with God or get out type thing.
Yeah.
Did the session end at that point, or was he just trying to be able to find a way to walk away from the table?
So we fought him. He died. The session continued maybe another 30 minutes or so, but and reached a good conclusion. And he sat there through the entire thing and enjoyed it. Yeah.
People are weird.
It is one of the challenges to it kind of a parallel thing that I've seen is where you get one player, like the group is together and one player goes off to do something else. As a GM, I think this is my philosophy now is because they've gone off, they don't get half the attention. It isn't split 50-50. They get the same amount of attention they would get, as it can. And that can be painful sometimes because they're going to have to sit there for a bit, but you really have to watch the time when you do that. Give them the attention, like they get the time that they deserve, but they don't monopolize as a result of those things.
I've seen that in the past, and I think it's important to also make that explicit.
Yeah.
And let them know as a player, we'll handle you in a little bit. The main group is doing something. You'll get your spotlight here in a little bit. And yeah.
Yeah.
I don't do the take someone away from the table and have a chat with them. Like maybe I should have in a couple of sessions with my kids group, but I'm just I feel like something I learned from PBTA is total transparency. Like don't hide anything. Like we're trying to create a story, so let's get as much information on the table as building materials for that story. But I also sense, Stephen, from the story you just told us that that necessarily would not have been able to, you wouldn't have been able to have that conversation. The GM would not have been able to have that conversation with that player in front of everyone else.
Yeah, part of it was probably the session and part of, what game we were playing and the mechanics for that game. And then part of it was probably also, it's the equivalent of, okay, the GM just equivalently X-carded this, this player. Let's go out and find out what the problems are to see what we can do to resolve it. Just like if someone had X-carded some subject matter.
Mm-hmm.
The first time that it gets X-carded, you roll it back. And if you hit it again, then you need to have the conversation about, okay, what was it that was being hit so that we can avoid it?
Yeah, it's clearly that knowing some of the social dynamics there, it probably helped him be able to manage that situation. Other topics, we've got about 20 minutes left. Other topics we want to hit on? Questions people have?
One of the things that was in the document was pacing.
Okay.
And Robert and I think, are kind of at an advantage here because, for me, what I look at when I look at pacing is how you handled the Tales from the Loop game that Robert and I were both in. You missed a session, but you told a complete satisfying story in 3 sessions, including Stars and Wishes, Roses and Thorns, and we were still out 15 minutes before the end. How do you do it?
One of the things about Tales from the Loop is that it has the challenge of being a mystery as well as being a character thing. And I still plot that pretty loosely. Like I know where we start. I know that this is, the mystery that we're going to have set up. I know kind of what might be the branches from there and a general sense of where clues might go, but I don't write out other scenes very much. But then I also know where it's probably going to end. Like the person who did this or the place this is going on is this place. I can have a sense of what that is. And I will keep an eye on the time, and we need to, in that last hour, we need to get that person on stage, or we need to get to that place so that we can get to that scene. And I think it's kind of knowing where you want to begin, and if it's a mystery, where it's going to end. I mean, Tales from the Loop gives you that luxury because you are running a mystery, as opposed to a PBTA game where you're like, I don't know where this can go. We might be on the moon at the end of this session. I don't know. It's not as bad as Amber, where you really couldn't plan. And but that was a combination of some of the things I talked about early on in this chat about setting up expectations, being really clear about those, but then in terms of plotting, only putting a couple fixed points on your map, and
Is that per session, or is that for the story overall? Because one of the things that always flipped my lid about it, and this is true for every game you've GM'd that I've been in, every session ends on a cliffhanger of some sort, and yet it never feels forced. It doesn't feel like we're just going to stop here. It's like you built up to that point, and then
here's the thing is, I didn't build up to that point. In those cases, if you go back and watch, the players have built up to that point. I've thrown in some things, I've elaborated on them, I've pushed on it, but it's that the players have presented me with the materials to build that. The big meta story, any of the meta stories, like Tales from the Loop, actually really, this is a really good example, is the bigger story that we got is the arcs for all of your characters. Completely emerged from you. I threw in, kind of some GM's moves that were twists and things like that, but it's all about where you wanted to take your character, and that formed the overall arching arc. I just did some cute mysteries in between. You were telling us how your characters were evolving over the course of that. I always want to throw in, for any character in an arc over multiple sessions, I want to throw in at least one monkey wrench that the players weren't expecting, but otherwise I want to play with what they've got set up as their expectations. Like, I'll give you an example from the other Tales from the Loop game. This was Sarah J. She had all this bad interactions with her father, and at a certain point along the campaign, she found out that her father was a burglar. This is not something she had established, but she hadn't established what her father did, and there were all these indications, and it was something, and it played into what she was feeling between her and the character and her father, and then she built from that. And that's just a one throwaway. I didn't like dwell on the thing. I suggested there were problems, and she leaned into it as much as she wanted, and it helped define the arc of play.
And right now I just have a GIF of you played yourself flashing in my face.
Yeah,
me right now.
Exactly.
Okay. I had not thought of it like that. So
yeah, and Tales from the Loop is a really good example because it is about building that mystery landscape, having some cool things out there, but the players get to kind of decide who they are in the course of that. Other stuff, let's look at the thing. How many sessions do you give a game you're not liking before you give it up? Face to face, I will kill it quickly.
Like within a session or two?
If we're a couple 3 sessions in and I'm like, ooh, this is not good, I will kill that, because those people are coming over to my house, and they're making an investment. I don't want to push my way through at that point. I will say, this isn't I don't think this is clicking for us. I will try and get to a point where I'll say, do you want to do a session and wrap it up, or do you want to stop here? And I've had those conversations, and I've cut things short. I will say, online, I'll play all the sessions. If I put it down for 4 or 5 sessions and it's not working for me, I'll still try to see if I can go through, and that's probably not the best thing. Like I just ran Apocalypse World last month. That is not my favorite PBTA game. I'm gonna put it to you really. There's later PBTA games play into the way that I like to run more, and there's a lot of stuff with a bunch of battle moves and things, and I did not do a good job with it.
So
But
you played second edition.
Yeah, played second edition.
Yeah.
But I was like, okay, we keep coming back, and we play out these things. We ended up having the final session canceled because 2 players couldn't make it, and the other player had to evacuate because of the California wildfires. So it was like, okay, I was like, darn, because I've already fucked this game up really badly. So
I'd be kind of curious to hear what that means to you. Like, what is it? What does a bad game look like?
a bad game looks to me like when I throw things out, like, oh, there's this thing. Why don't we talk about where it's going to go, and the players don't make anything of it. Like it's clearly not interesting, or in the case of this, we had a big battle scene in session 2, and I'm so used to PBTA where we're going to abstract this battle and blah, 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 blah. But because of the way those moves are, both for the PC moves and the way the battle moves are and the thing, you have to be much more explicit about what the forces are that are arrayed, what the positions are, things like that, so that players can use that information to make their decisions. And I didn't realize that. And so I was going my loosey-goosey usual approach, and it ended up we had to go back several times and retcon and step back, and that wasn't great. And here's the other thing that I think was a real indicator of the Apocalypse World game not being great is it was very much about a plot. Like, here were these people, we had to take care of them. It was less about human interaction and less about character choices than it was, okay, what do you want to do? Okay, well, I think we want to go and find out who's doing this thing, in that way of we need to go and follow the adventure path. And I think that comes from me, not having set good personal stakes early on.
So
That'd be my sense of it.
have you played or run the first edition of Apocalypse World?
I haven't, but I played a second edition game that Rich Rogers ran, and it was great. Like, I really enjoyed it. Like, I know that game can be great. Rich has also run it a lot. But it's also, it's also a little, it is a dark game. It's a kind of game that can be kind of mean too.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if that's what I want out of a game these days.
I prefer the first edition of Apocalypse World because the second edition added on all these additional playbooks and moves and things that I found to be a little bit too dense for me. I had a similar experience with the first time I played Blades in the Dark. I played Blades in the Dark at a convention, and it was so dense, I did not enjoy it. And I kind of looked around just now, and I was like, I think I actually put my Blades in the Dark like on the back shelf somewhere. And then I played in Hack the Planet, Frazier's Forged in the Dark game. And I'd signed up for 4 sessions, and it took me a while to catch up and figure everything out. But after session like 2, I was like, oh, this game is awesome. I get Blades in the Dark now. It took me a few sessions to figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rich says that burned over or burned out supplement that the Bakers have put out for Apocalypse World, that he hasn't run it yet, but he's read through it, and he's like, this may be how I run Apocalypse World from now on. Like, he thinks that there's a lot of good stuff in there.
The only time I've really run Apocalypse World was the Jason Morningstar's Fury Road hack.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you say, this is, Mad Max Fury Road, everyone buys into that super dark, this is going to be really awful kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to hear from other folks as to what makes a bad game.
Yeah. Tell us about a bad experience. Robert, how about we start with you? What was a bad game that you had? Not necessarily on the Gauntlet, even face to face.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because mine was actually a convention Blades in the Dark game where I sat down at the table and I think we had like 6 people. And I feel like, I think we were doing like character introductions and I feel like I finished mine and then like an hour went by before it came back around to me. And I mean, I just had to, like, it was an indie games on demand. So I was just, you know what, guys, I'm just going to step away from this table. And I haven't ever had a chance to come back to Blades in the Dark since then. But and that was like the second game I had really played, like second non-traditional game I had ever played at that point. So it just made no sense at all to me at the time.
The GMs, designers, I know you want to show off your games and I know you want to show them for the maximum number of people. Don't. A reasonable number of people. Actually, I heard this about a couple of Gauntlet Con games where designers were running their games and they had way too many people at the table. And I've seen that, the impulse is to expose people, but oof. David, example of a bad game from you?
Yeah, I think I was the one who put this in the notes, and I was thinking of one in particular because I played a game of Fate Accelerated, or I ran a game that it was like Avatar: The Last Airbender world. I was pretty excited about it. And in my face-to-face group, it's like about 50-50 people who are really into the indie games and people that are more of like, we could play Pathfinder if you want. So this was kind of throwing a bone to them. Like, I've heard this game is crunchier. I'll learn this game for you and we'll play this. And I mean, I almost disliked it from the beginning because I think I just couldn't just grok it. It took me forever. I don't think I ever really figured it out. Actually, on the Gauntlet Slack, I feel like after every session I played of that, I went there and I was like, guys, can you help me out? I don't know what I'm doing here. And I gave that way too. It was like 10 or 12 sessions. And
No.
Yeah, it was really stupid of me. And I think the only thing that ended it, similar to your Apocalypse World story, was 2 of the players were like dating and they broke up and they're like, oh, we're really sorry. We don't want to ruin the game, but like we so much tension now. Maybe we should take a break or something. I'm like, you know what? We should actually just quit. It's fine. That was a good ending. That last game, it was totally fine. So yeah.
Sorry you broke up. That's terrible.
Yeah. It's like, I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. We'll just end the entire game. Don't worry about it. But yeah, I gave it way too much, and I was like, what am I doing? And
Dan, do you have an example?
Yeah, we my adult group, we just wrapped Coriolis, and it was interesting. I really wanted to like this game, and I really wanted to, and I love the setting.
I've been writing it in Impulse Drive, and it rocks.
Oh yeah. But the my friend who he was when he was GMing, and he came up with a fantastic plot, a really interesting story, and we were all really into it. But we were into the story idea, but we just couldn't. We were struggling to kind of make the rules work for how we wanted to play. And actually, Lowell, I think I was listening to a podcast, and you were critiquing Forbidden Lands, and it was when we kept bumping up the most extreme thing for us was we kept bumping up the leveling up rules, and it just leveling up in Coriol, it just didn't make any sense. Like this didn't fit, and my friend James and I, we kept like trying to hack the leveling up rules. And we just couldn't get to a comfortable place where we play with our spouses, and like they were just clearly struggling with it and not having a good time. We stuck it out because James had put a lot of work into the story, so we wanted to finish up that story. But we all agreed that the system, And it's interesting to me just to hear all these stories. They very rules oriented, not necessarily setting oriented.
Uh-huh.
But like when you kind of bump up against, when the rules become too prominent or too obvious in a session, I think that's when I feel like I'm just not enjoying the game.
Puckett, what about you? Do you have a bad game experience you can tell us about?
Yeah, I've got several. The one that instantly sprang to mind, and I'm not sure if this is quite a rules thing like you were talking about, Dan, but it was definitely a mechanics thing. It was a game where I think it was sort of loosely rooted in PBTA, but combat was all done with manipulating a standard playing card deck. And I don't remember the name of it. Basically, it was kind of like, it was almost like Pokemon, where you're a trainer and you have this animal, and this animal is your familiar. Terra something or other, maybe Familiars of Terra.
Okay, yeah, familiar to Terra.
And it is to this day, it is the only game that I have tapped out of because I just could not handle the mechanics at all. It felt like playing Magic the Gathering with some sort of manipulation deck and having an RPG sort of shell around it. And I just could not. And about an hour and a half in, we'd gotten to player generation, we'd gotten to that part of developing characters, and I saw that and I was just like, no, this is not my thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think everybody has stories of player conflict. I think everybody has stories of things that just weren't working out at the table. Somebody who was struggling to deal with the rule set, or or feeling like we were struggling with the rule set. You know, I had an experience like that at Gauntlet Con with somebody who was demoing their game, basically. Kind of wish I just tapped out of that one as well, because I could have finished Gauntlet Con on this fantastic high note and gone out all giddy. And instead it was like a little, but I mean, I'll stick with almost anything. The one thing I won't stick with is a player who is either intentionally or unintentionally making decisions that are harming other players. That popped up in a Monster Hearts game where somebody was talking about their character that was a conspiracy theorist and was talking about God, what the hell is that thing? The Protocols of the Elders of Zion.
Oh, God.
And yeah, okay, I see Dan's facial expression. I was typing X card into chat. Another player was typing X card into chat. The GM missed it. And that was a kind of a cursed Monster Hearts session to begin with. So, you know, there's,
wow.
I mean, the person wasn't trying to be malicious. They were talking about a conspiracy theorist who had gone off the deep end and was just not paying attention to what was going on around them. So they were, in that sense, it was actually in keeping with the character. But at the same time, it's one of those things that feels like you just don't touch it. I mean, you want to talk about
Yeah.
Necronomicon, fine, that's one thing. But there's certain things like that maybe that feel like they can easily derail a game and be triggering and need to be X-carded for that reason. And it's unfortunate when people don't realize it.
It is the thing, I think. I wish there was a better way to handle the X card in online environments. I just say X card, but I know that can be, that's you being very proactive. It's the same thing if you have the X card in the middle of the table at a con where people have to actually reach out and touch it. That works against them. You need to give people each an X card so that they can do it without feeling like I'm about to really expose myself. And
Magpie does that really well.
Yeah.
They have business cards that have the X card on it, and on the back have, you know, we care about you kind of stuff. And they pass them out so everyone has one sitting in front of them.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing I learned from Magpie is individual X cards do lines and veils anonymously. give people index cards and have them write that down, and you will get a better set of lines and veils doing it that way. It's actually why I've moved to doing it anonymously online. I kind of have modified that checklist that they've had from the safety tools thing from Monty Cook, and I've got that as a tab in the sheet. I put some examples, and people can fill that out anytime during character creation and so on. I need to wrap us up here. I need to bring this to a stop. We're going to do this again. I'm going to try and do that. Maybe we'll do some themed ones. We'll try this some of the time. Thank you so much for being willing to take some time out of your evening to do this. And I'm going to hang on to this discussion topic sheet that Dan put here. I'll probably share a link in the show notes if that's okay with you, Dan.
Yeah. We should ask consent for everyone, because I was taking notes, and so I was recording verbatims.
Oh, okay.
Folks down at the bottom, so we can maybe remove
Why don't we do this? What we'll do actually is I'll have you make a copy of this, and we'll just do the agenda so people saw what the questions are, if people are cool with that. Okay.
I'm cool with all of it. I mean, I was going to ask Dan, because Lowell, I was trying to work on that document for onboarding for new GMs. I was going to ask Dan if I could incorporate this into that, because he was asking about the GMing 101 thing.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, it's ours. So
I'm good. I'm good with this being shared generally. Is anybody?
I'm fine with it.
Okay, and everybody take a look, and if just to make sure, and if you have any problems with it, you can give us notes on that. I'm going to go ahead and stop the streaming here, and thank you all very, very much.